Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Chris Williams, and as the Outreach and Dissemination Director for the SAKI TTA team, I will be your host today. But before we get started, we wanted to go over a few housekeeping items for you. If technical support is needed, please let us know in the chat. Patrick will be our technical host today and will assist with any challenges that may arise. I also wanted to draw your attention to the live transcript button located within your own screen Zoom controls. You can use this feature to turn captioning services on and off. If you have any questions for our speakers regarding today's material, please submit them using the Q&A feature, not the chat, the Q&A. While our presenters may address questions during the presentation, we will have time for Q&A at the end of the session. Today's session is being recorded. We will share the recording and a PDF of the slides used as part of this webinar to all who have registered for today's event. This is the SAKI webinar titled Fiscal Year 2024 National Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Solicitation Webinar, presented by Dr. Angela Williamson, the supervisor of BJA's Forensics Unit and FBI VICAT Liaison, as well as Ms. Carrie Hendricks, a senior policy advisor with the BJA Policy Office's Forensics Unit. Supervisory Special Agent Amy Whitman, who oversees the FBI's Investigative Genetic Genealogy Program, is also on the line to answer any questions you all may have. And finally, representatives from the BJA Programs Office are also on the line to answer any questions relevant to their side of the house. And without further ado, I will pass things off to Ms. Carrie Hendricks.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. So we'll get started. First, we're going to do a welcome and introduction for an overview for OJP and BJA. Then we're going to go through the solicitation and the purpose areas. We'll do eligibility and application requirements, as well as application resources, and then we'll round out the afternoon with a Q&A. All right. What is the Office of Justice Programs? The Office of Justice Programs, also known as OJP, provides grant funding, training, research, and statistics to the criminal justice community. OJP is one of 3 grant-making components of the department, along with the Office of Violence Against Women and the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services. We are located within OJP's Bureau of Justice Assistance. BJA was created in 1984 to reduce violent crime, create safer communities, and to reform our nation's criminal justice system. BJA strengthens the nation's criminal justice system and helps America's state, local, and tribal jurisdictions reduce and prevent crime, reduce recidivism, and promote a fair and safe criminal justice system. Our esteemed director is Carlton Moore. BJA supports the field through our investments as well as targeted engagement with our stakeholders. All right, next we'd like to hear from you about your experience with federal grants. Please review and respond to the poll questions so we can gauge your experience with federal funding. Okay, great. Thank you so much. It looks like many of you have extensive experience with federal grants, so we're glad to have you back and we appreciate your interest in OJP. We will now transition to an overview of SAKI program history and explain our specific purpose areas. Dr. Williamson, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Carrie, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to start with everything that SAKI can help support in your jurisdiction and the now many purpose areas that may be of interest to you and your department when you're looking at the funding. So just a quick snapshot Anything you can think of related to cold cases involving a sexual component and other related violent cold case crimes can be supported under SAKI. Your funding can be used for inventory, testing, tracking the sexual assault kits and other crime scene evidence, crime analysis, and VICAP entry of criteria cases. Everything that I know something you all very much love, advanced DNA testing, including FGG. Funding can be used to investigate and prosecute cases, and this does include travel to interview victims, witnesses, and suspects. At the heart of SAKI is victim engagement and support, as well as family support for homicide victims as well, and their families left behind. Obviously, there's a huge training and technical assistance component of SAKI with our own TTA provider who is hosting today's webinar. And if this interests your jurisdiction as well, we will fund the increased collection of lawfully owed offender DNA for CODIS upload purposes that may lead to the identification of other violent offenders in your jurisdiction. So SAKI has grown enormously. In the last 10 years, we started with 20 sites. We now have 90 active SAKI grantees across 43 states and the District of Columbia, so 44 all up. And we have been able to award $344 million to date, which is pretty amazing. Just a quick snapshot of the cumulative data and the impact that all our SAKI sites are helping achieve across the country, and that we hope you will help contribute to if you join the SAKI program. I think the most impressive thing is to look at the 209,000 kits that have been inventoried. And I always like to point out that we don't just see numbers under SAKI. This is over 200,000 victims that now have a chance at getting answers, have a chance at the perpetrators being held accountable and some sort of justice. This is really what we're focused on here, not statistics, but seeing these cases as the individuals who have been impacted by these crimes. And then under lawfully owed DNA, we don't have that many sites working on this. I don't want to misspeak. I think it's around 13 right now, and they've already identified almost 500,000 samples that are most likely owed to CODIS, and which, if you think your jurisdiction doesn't have this problem, you most likely do. It's a problem across the country. So if you've already kind of addressed your kits and you're trying to figure out what else you can do to help solve these violent crimes, lawfully owed DNA might be something that would very much be beneficial for your jurisdiction. So I love DNA. We all love DNA, but will it solve every case? And the answer is sadly no. We all know there's not always going to be DNA left behind in the evidence for a multitude of reasons. And under SAKI, we're seeing that about 50% of cases will be solved with the magic bullet of DNA. But what do we do with the other cases? This is why we established a partnership with the FBI's VICAP unit. And the next slide just demonstrates a little bit more what that partnership involves. So if you're not familiar with VICAP, Chris, we can go to the next slide. VICAP is a database much like CODIS, except the great thing about VICAP is you don't need DNA to put your case in. This is behaviorally based on the MO, anything to do with the character of the perpetrator, what vehicle they were driving, even what they smelt like. This can go into the VICAP database. So this is just another tool that we ask our grantees use to try and help solve as many cases as possible, especially since we know that many of these offenders cross jurisdictional and state lines. And that's one of the other biggest benefits of VICAP, is connecting cases nationwide. We do give you funding to get your cases in because it's not quick to get every case entered, at least probably 30 minutes per case, but you can put this under your SAKI budget. So yes, we ask you to do this, but we will give you the funding and the training to make this happen. So if you get funding under purpose areas 1, 2, 4, and 6, all criteria cases under those awards must be entered into VICAP by the end of your grant period. So I mentioned there are a lot of purpose areas under SAKI now. We started with 1, somehow we're now up to 6. So I'm going to go through each of those purpose areas in more detail over the coming slides. We have about $50 million available in this year's funding. You can apply for more than one purpose area. So for example, you could say, well, I need funding to investigate and prosecute cold case sexual assaults, but I'd also like to work on lawfully owed DNA collections. You can most definitely submit 2 applications with 2 purposes under those applications and spell out how you would work both of those projects. SAKI Purpose Area 1. This is the original SAKI. You might have heard it being referenced before as traditional SAKI, but really it's the comprehensive approach. So this is really for jurisdictions that want to get first a handle on how many unsubmitted sexual assault kits you have in your jurisdiction and really start at step 1 and work your way through that. So doing the inventory and the tracking, create that multidisciplinary team, which are going to be investigators, prosecutors, victim advocates, forensic specialists. You will hire and designate a site coordinator. That is a requirement. It is a full-time job. It is a heavy lift, and we give a lot of support for the site coordinators because of the tasks they have to do under SAKI. You can do a lot of different types of DNA testing under this purpose area. So testing of secondary evidence in addition to the sexual assault kits, YSTR testing and surname searches, FGG, familial searches, crime analysis. The other nice thing that you can do under this purpose area is you can actually create soft interview rooms for victims, survivors, families, and witnesses. And that you can find a list of all the activities that are allowed on page 16 of the solicitation. But really, the whole thing about SAKI is if the activity is directly linked to working a case and helping resolve a case, it is generally allowed under the program. SAKI Purpose Area 2 is really little SAKI. It is for smaller jurisdictions, rural, tribal. It is for those agencies that most likely don't have a high volume of kits or cases, but they still want to address those cases that have not been worked in their community. So really just think of it as Purpose Area 1 on a smaller scale, and these awards are $500,000 or under. Purpose Area 3 is the lawfully owed DNA purpose area. So this is for the identification, collection, and DNA profiling of samples from convicted offenders who should have had their DNA in CODIS, but from whom samples have never been collected or submitted to a lab for testing, and obviously not uploaded to CODIS. So you do not have to be an existing SAKI award recipient, but you must meet the requirements that are outlined in the solicitation. So the main requirement is that your jurisdiction only qualifies once you've made a significant progress in eliminating or have eliminated any backlog of unsubmitted sexual assault kits. And also not that you've just done the testing, that you've also done investigation and prosecution associated with those cases as well. So it's kind of a similar model to when you're working with your kits. You know, you're going to create a census of who probably owes DNA in your jurisdiction. You're going to work very closely with lawyers to help you really figure out who does owe, then come up with the DNA collection plan, and then get those samples into CODIS. And rapid DNA, which I know everyone is very enthusiastic about, rapid DNA is allowable under this section as well. Purpose Area 4, a lot of our SAKI sites who started as Purpose Area 1 have moved to Purpose Area 4 because they're at the stage where they've really done all the testing of the kits. They're focused now on advanced testing methodologies, really focusing on the investigation and prosecution of cases. You can use this grant money to go interview serial offenders in your jurisdiction, and we partner you with a profiler from the FBI's BAU if you want that help, to try and figure out if there's any more cases they've done that are not connected by DNA. You can look at all your profiles in CODIS from your previously tested kits that failed to hit to someone. You can do FGG on all of those non-hits in CODIS, and we have grantees that are doing projects just like that. Like I said already, you have to put these cases into VICAP as well. And you have to ensure that, again, you have addressed your unsubmitted sexual assault kits before you come in for this purpose area. Purpose area 5 is almost like a graduation area, even though I know we've tacked on a purpose area 6, but I would view purpose area 5 as a graduation area of traditional SAKI work. So this is where you've tested your kits, you've done advanced testing as well, you've got your cases in VICAP, you feel pretty good about the effort you've put in for all those cold cases. But the last piece of the puzzle is, how do we keep this great work going once you stop applying for grants, once the federal money runs out? So this is really to engage with your local jurisdiction, your local lawmakers, policymakers, to really figure out what you need to keep a sustainable program in place and put those procedures, policies in place within a 3-year period. And then purpose area 6. I always say we're going to stop at this, but we shall see. But why do we have another purpose area? Well, we were starting to see that across SAKI sites, investigators are finding that approximately 65% of offenders linked to the kits have prior convictions for other non-sexual violent offenses. So in other words, the majority of these offenders linked to kits are violent offenders, but they're not necessarily convicted of other sexual crimes. And then over 78% of sexual assault kit DNA CODIS hits to serial offenders are attributed to violent serial offenders as opposed to known convicted serial sex offenders. And it's showing us, I think, what everyone in the audience probably already knows. People who commit rapes and sexually based crimes most likely and most often commit other violent crimes. So this is why we added on purpose area 6. It is seen as really an extension of the SAKI work, but another effort for a comprehensive approach to all violent cold case crimes in your jurisdiction. So under this purpose area, you can work all other violent cold case crimes that are not sexually motivated, as long as you have addressed all your sexually motivated cold case crimes in your jurisdiction. And the whole intent of this is to identify more of these offenders who are committing these crimes, who are non-preferential, to help prevent additional sexual assaults and other violent crimes, to give more answers to victims and their families. And like the other purpose areas, you can do pretty much all the same activities. So you can do your FGG, crime analysis, investigative work, prosecutorial work, victim and family advocacy. So you do have to do an inventory similar to the other SAKI purpose areas. However, you can define what violent cold case crimes you want to work under this. So you might just say, we're just strictly going to work homicides, or we might work homicides and kidnappings, or we want to work unidentified homicide victims. You can define what you want to include under your census. You will need to create a multidisciplinary working group as well, and a site coordinator. I think you're seeing a theme here with having a site coordinator. And again, you can do all the cool types of DNA testing. So under all the SAKI purpose areas, we do allow pretty much any type of DNA testing that is widely acceptable in the legal community. YSTR testing for direct comparisons, if your jurisdiction happens to have a local YSTR database, which a few do, and if you want to pursue YSTR surname genealogical searches. DNA testing of shell cases, we do stipulate that you make sure you use either the ATF lab if you meet their criteria, or a private lab that utilizes the ATF methodology because of the increased success rate shown by this methodology. MVAC is allowable, but it does require a case-by-case submission and review by us, simply because it costs twice as much as other techniques out there. And depending on your evidence, it may preclude additional DNA testing down the road. So we just want to help you evaluate if that's the best methodology for your case. We fund every aspect that's associated with familial DNA searches, which I was just counting the other day, allowable currently in 16 states. This is a heavy lift on your lab. So we do ask that if you want to do familial, which is a requirement before you go to genealogy under SAKI, that you speak to your lab, you come in with a letter of commitment from your lab, and that your lab has a line in the budget, because it costs money to run these searches. So you really have to work with your lab before saying, yeah, we're going to do it. Have a plan before you apply for the funding. And then phenotyping and ancestral analysis is still allowable on a case-by-case basis, but I think most of you probably know that with FGG, it's really not utilized a whole lot anymore. But we will consider it if you think it will be advantageous for your case. All right, FGG. I know there has been a lot of talk about the changes to FGG. So before I start going through this slide, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background about where this change came from. I want to make it clear it didn't happen overnight. We've had talking about this for a couple of years now and trying to figure out what we can do to better serve the field. So two main reasons why we made shifts with FGG. First one being fiscally responsible with limited federal funding and really trying to safeguard the methodology. The DOJ, FBI, BJA, OJP, we're all under DOJ. And as you see with the use of VICAP, we really try and optimize the use of federal resources. So that's really, where this came from. We're also seeing an increased demand in FGG. We're getting constant directives from Congress to increase the amount of awards we make for FGG, but there's no associated increase in funding. So how do we make this happen? How do we help you all with the same budget? The other thing that we've been seeing under SAKI is a lot of these cases who have been outsourced for FGG, the invoice coming back is over 10,000, up to 15,000 sometimes for one case. And that's a lot of money. And again, we are held accountable with how money is spent. And 10, 15,000 on one case, that could equal 3 cases if we can leverage free tree building. So in the bottom line, using the IGG team really helps stretch our dollars and helps you work more cases with FGG. You can, it's not on this slide, we do apologize, but you can hire in-house genealogists with your grant money if that's something that you wish to do as well. Something else that was brought up in the community when the solicitation was launched was the capacity of the FBI IGG team to assist. Amy is on and she can speak directly to this if you have any additional questions, but her team now has over 200 trained genealogists. So, okay, they're doing this as a collateral duty, and I've heard concerns about that. However, SAKI sites combined are only doing around 200 FGG cases per year. So if you do the math on that, that's 1 case per FBI IGG genealogist. So I don't really have any concerns with that. None of us do. We think it should go well. But like we say in the solicitation, if there are any issues, you can ask us for exceptions. You can let us know if there's any issues. And also, if you are using private genealogists, they're not just working 1 case at once either. So our vision with this is that it should not be an obstruction to what you're doing. You should not see a delay in your FGG work at all. Also, just want to reiterate that everyone who's working IGG for the FBI are FBI staff. So there was a rumor going around about that as well. All right, all that being said, FGG is an allowable activity under purpose areas 1, 2, 4, and 6. If you're conducting it in-house, you will be required to complete the BJA FBI archived FGG training, which is on our website, and any other trainings that may occur during the lifespan of the grant, which we definitely want to do more intensive trainings over the coming years. You can use your SAKI funds to outsource the testing portion of the FGG only. If outsourcing your FGG work, the vendor lab must perform their SNP testing in-house. Again, this is to help you avoid paying any unnecessary third-party fees, and also to help, ensure the integrity of your evidence and chain of custody. So like we started with, SAKI funds may not be used for the true building portion of FGG unless you're doing this in-house. We want our sites to leverage the FBI's IGG team for this work. And like I already said, we cannot say this enough, we will consider and grant exceptions on a case-by-case basis. So besides being free, which I know I keep saying, what are the other advantages of working with the FBI IGG team? Well, they are comprised of highly trained genetic genealogists who also have extensive investigative experience and knowledge regarding the investigative processes, legal consideration, and discovery obligations. And I think this is really important if you're monitoring a lot of the high-profile FGG cases right now. They're coming under scrutiny, so it really helps you in your cases to have this experience at your fingertips. Their members are really mindful of downstream implications of activities associated with the methodology, and they work regularly with prosecutors on warrants and discovery motions. Like I said, you're going to come across this, and it's really helpful to have this. It's free, which means if you're not paying for tree building, you can go get snips done on another case. So basically think of it as a way to double what you can do with your FGG funding allocation. The other great thing about the IGG team is their access to law enforcement only resources and databases. This is something that you can't get with a private genealogist. And to be clear, the private genealogists are excellent at what they do. But this is just another advantage of the FBI IGG team. One of the other biggest things that previous grantees will know this, and anyone working these cases, is reference collection and target testing. Often these individuals on the other side of the country, while the FBI can leverage their network to help you get these collections, so you don't have to use your resources or grant money if someone from the FBI can assist. So there are many reasons why they can be very helpful for you with your FGG cases. And I just want to say, we hear this a lot, and I just heard it pop up in the chat. And I'll let Amy speak to this when we hit the Q&A section, but the FBI does not take over your case. You will work the case with your FBI IGG person. But again, when we get to the Q&A, I'll let Amy speak to this more in depth. Unidentified human remains. So under SAKI, we have actually carved out money, and it was awarded to UNT, who I'm sure most of you have heard of. They have funding to specifically work unidentified Jane and John Doe sexually motivated homicide victims. And this just means if there was signs of sexual assault, or it could be skeletal remains of a female found in a remote area with no clothing. It can be something where a sexual assault is highly suspected. You can send your cases free to UNT to do CODIS eligible testing and to do FGG testing as well. To be eligible, your case needs to have STR MITRE profiles in CODIS before it goes to FGG. And the cause of death per our DOJ policy has to be ruled as a homicide or suspected homicide. If you have an undetermined cause of death, you just need to run that case by BJA. You can also do exhumations under SAKI, and that can be related to unidentifieds. It can be related to deceased suspects as well. Exhumations are permissible. There's just some extra NEPA paperwork that you have to do, but it's not insurmountable. And you can send physical evidence, bones, to the FGG vendor lab for you UHRs. And the other thing we do ask is that criteria cases and applicable cases are entered into VICAP and NAMUS for these unidentified individuals as well. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Carrie.
All right, great. So next we will transition to an overview of who can apply and what those application requirements are. So for eligibility, I know many of you have questions about how to meet the 75% threshold, so I will go over that with you. But for purpose areas 1 and 3, following entities are eligible to apply: state and law enforcement agencies, units of local government, governmental non-law enforcement agencies acting as their fiscal agents, prosecutorial agencies, and these include tribal governments as well. For purpose area 2, this is, as Angela mentioned, designed to be for smaller agencies. So this purpose area is available for small law enforcement agencies or a consortia of small law enforcement agencies that have fewer than 250 sworn officers, or a consortia of small agencies together with one lead applicant. For purpose areas 3, 4, and 6, eligibility is very similar to 1, but you also have to meet and show that you have addressed your unsubmitted kit backlog, including partially tested kits, and you have clearly demonstrated that you have also addressed the downstream activities, crime analysis, investigation, prosecution for at least 75% of those associated cases under your jurisdiction's control or authority. You do not have to be an existing or previous SAKI grantee, but you must be able to meet the criteria outlined in the solicitation. And so what we are looking for here is that if your jurisdiction had a backlog of unsubmitted kits, whether that be truly unsubmitted sexual assault kits or those that are considered partially tested by our definition, is that your jurisdiction has not only cleared that respective backlog, but you've also reviewed the cases from the backlog and reopened those investigations for at least 75% of those that were in your backlog. So again, you don't have to have a clearance rate or a prosecutorial rate of 75%. We just want to know from the cases that you had in your backlog, have you at least reopened those investigations in the process of reviewing those for crime analysis, investigation, prosecution for at least 75% of those cases. If your jurisdiction has never had a backlog of unsubmitted kits, and that includes partially tested kits, you do not need to worry with meeting your 75% threshold. But that is only if you have never had a backlog and you do not have a partially tested kit backlog. If you are unsure about whether or not you have an unsubmitted kit backlog, which would include partially tested kits, you want to work with your lab to verify that information. The definition of a partially tested kit from the solicitation is a SAC that has only been subjected to serological screening or one that has previously been tested with non-CODIS eligible DNA methodology. Again, if you're not sure whether or not you've had a backlog previously, check with your crime lab and ask them to work with you to certify that information. Similarly, for purpose area 5, to round out this discussion, the same, very similarly to 3, 4, and 6. But again, 5 is that last grant application that you might submit for experienced SAKI sites that need one last round of funding to ensure their SAKI goals and objectives are firmly integrated into their community. Finally, I want to touch on one last thing before I get to the deadline. If your jurisdiction cannot certify that you have effectively addressed both your unsubmitted and your partially tested kits, it is likely premature for you to apply for 3, 4, 5, or 6. If you are having trouble figuring out whether or not you're eligible and your crime lab can't help you with that, you probably need to just apply for purpose area 1, which is most comprehensive, and you can do many things with it. So we would encourage you, if you're struggling with whether or not you can meet the 75%, you're not sure whether or not you have a backlog, pivot to purpose area 1. Okay, I'm ready for the next slide. Your application deadlines, this is a big deal. I'll hit on these once again before we close out today, but applications are submitted via a 2-step process. One is for grants.gov and the other one is for Just Grants. Please set a reminder for both of these if they are critically important. If you miss the first one, you will not be able to move on to submit your final application within Just Grants. So please pay very close attention to the time frames. Also, please note that the deadline is 8:59 Eastern Time. It is not 11:59 as it has been in previous years, and if you were in another time zone, you need to adjust accordingly and make sure you submit by 8:59 Eastern Time. As we start to wrap up our discussion today, I wanted to share with you some application resources. You may find OJP's Grant Application Resource Guide at this web address. And again, we will be sharing this slide deck with you, so you'll have it. I highly recommend you keep this close as you are drafting your application, because it will answer many of the questions that you have about attachments, how you draft your budget, what needs to be in your proposal abstract. It has a lot of great information. If you'd like to learn more about Just Grants and the related payment systems, you can find that information here at this web address, which I also highly recommend. The more familiar you are with Just Grants, the easier this process will be. So please spend some time getting familiar with the program. And a quick tip on Just Grants is that it times out quickly, so save your work often. Should you need technical assistance while working on your application or during submission, you want to reach out to the email addresses herein, depending on which part of the process you are having trouble with. If you'd like to stay connected to OJP for upcoming grant announcements or newsletters, please text your email address to 468-311 to subscribe. You can also stay connected to BJA via our social media accounts or by scanning this QR code to subscribe to Justice Matters and news from BJA to receive the latest information from our office directly in the field. If you have additional questions about the solicitation or how to respond to a particular requirement, you should contact the OJP Response Center, and they will assist you and or route you to our policy team for further assistance as may be appropriate. Another reminder that there are dual deadlines. Again, it's a two-step process. We've had applicants previously not be able to move forward in the application process because they did not submit their SF424 timely, or they otherwise missed the grant.gov deadline. Again, if you don't hit that first deadline, you will not be able to submit to the second, so please read the solicitation carefully. All right, here are your quick reference contacts should something arise that you need assistance with. Again, for technical assistance with the programmatic solicitation requirements, you'll contact the Response Center. All right, that wraps up our presentation for today. We sincerely thank each of you for joining us and for your commitment to solving violent crime in your communities and for your interest in the SAKI program. I'll turn it back over to our host for Q&A, and we'll start addressing your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Carrie and Angela, for your insight today. We've got a handful of questions coming in. I know some have been addressed just through the feature already, but the ones that we have outstanding, question from Thomas Colbeck, specifically asking Carrie if they have addressed the backlog for perks, I believe physical evidence, rape kit, or something along those lines, partial perks, but are still investigating, analyzing, testing secondary evidence in these cases and conducting FGG. Can they still apply under 4, or should they apply under purpose area 1?
You know, I think that's going to end up being jurisdictional specific, but I think if you can quantify how much you've done and feel like that you can easily certify, you're sort of at a 75% threshold for the things that you had in that initial inventory, you could apply for 4. But again, if you're worried about whether or not you meet that, you can do most of the same activities under 1, and so you could just pivot to 1 for this cycle.
Great, thank you, Carrie. A couple of questions from Carl Stark. Are participants, i.e. award grantees, required to follow the NIST National Best Practices for Sexual Assault Kits, a multidisciplinary approach, the guide?
We certainly recommend establishing best practices for your sexual assault kits, and we certainly recommend that you follow the National Best Practice documents. I also see the question about are participants, award grantees required to establish an electronic evidence tracking system? That is in the solicitation, and yes, we do require that.
Great, thank you. Tina asks or states that they'll be applying for Purpose Area 1, but wondering to what extent investigation and prosecution is allowed under those funds if, for example, there's not usable evidence that comes directly from sexual assault kit.
Yeah, it's case dependent. We want you to do what is best and what you can do for each and every case.
Then we have David has asked, can you apply for Purpose Area 4 without having to apply for 1, 2, or 3?
Yeah, it's not chronological. It's just us adding on ideas after years. So as long as you meet the criteria for Purpose Area 4, then you can definitely apply.
Thanks, Angela. And then kind of follow-up question, can prosecutors' offices apply for Purpose Area 4?
Yes, they can. They just would otherwise need to meet their the solicitation requirements. And if they feel like they cannot meet the solicitation requirements for 4, they could pivot to 1 or 2 as applicable.
Steve Ocam has asked in regards to the dual submission deadlines, will there need to be 2 submissions to each if writing for 2 purpose areas?
Yes, thank you, Steve, for bringing that up. I was going to try to hit on that before we closed out because I've had a couple of different questions about that. If you want to apply for more than 1 purpose area, that is 2 completely separate applications. So make sure you're meeting dual deadlines with dual applications if you want more than 1 purpose area.
And then Lori Hopper asks, as a state crime lab, if our state unsubmitted kits were previously inventoried and tested through non-SAKI funding, in parentheses, Danny, and we have not used SAKI funding for anything associated with these SACs or cases, are we still required to track their progress through investigation and prosecution if the SACs have been submitted back to their originating jurisdictions?
You know, that's somewhat nuanced, Lori. I would think you're going to track your grant-funded activities. Just basically, you know, just basic advice. You're going to track grant-funded activities. So if you're using grant funds for investigation and prosecution, you would simply track those activities, but you do not necessarily have to track things that were not grant-funded. Now, as a statewide agency, that can sometimes get a little nuanced because you're going to have impacts from your funding that are not necessarily, for instance, if you're a statewide agency and you're passing down technical assistance or otherwise expertise to other state agencies, and the state agency follows through on your advice or your technical assistance, that maybe isn't necessarily directly funded, but it is certainly a result of your funding, if you will. So when you are filling out your performance measures, there are new performance measures, and there will be a narrative blank for you to talk more about statewide activities there if you're chosen for funding.
Great, thank you, Carrie. And Brent Nybecker has asked, in past solicitations, a required portion of the proposal narrative was regarding budget. The current solicitation does not have this listed as a section of the proposal narrative. So he's asking, do we no longer need to reflect specific costs in the proposal narrative? And can that be done instead only in the budget detail narrative?
I think you'd still want to do both, right? I think you want to give the peer reviewers a little bit of an overview in your proposal narrative, but most of your budget detail is going to go into your budget detail narrative.
All right, and then another question just came in. When will award notifications be made?
You will probably know before we will. Sorry, Carrie.
I was going to strive to get award notifications made according to the federal fiscal year, we're obviously posting late in the season. So I think it might be a little later than normal if I were guessing, but usually early fall, September, October timeframe.
Thomas Kolbeck has asked, for MVAC cases, do we need to just provide documentation to BJA showing that other methods were previously used on an item of evidence? And supplementary to that, also if our MVAC cost is less on an item of evidence than taking multiple samples, and is it in the best interest of the evidence? Would this be sufficient for the case by case?
Yeah, Thomas, I think we just like to know a little bit about the case. Like, was it found on a decomposed body? Is there a lot of blood present? Just little things like that, not like the whole case synopsis, but a little bit of context. And it's great if you could provide what methodologies have been used, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Regarding the 75% requirement, is that first specifically for purpose area 4? Is that a new requirement?
Not necessarily. It's not a new requirement that we recommended that you make substantial progress on investigations and prosecutions for those cases for purpose area 4 before you apply. But we did quantify it this year because people were having trouble really kind of trying to figure out, did they meet the criteria for purpose area 4. So we've tried to add a quantification to it to make that a little more easy to understand.
How long after the awards are announced will the funds be dispersed to the grant recipients?
Really applicant dependent, because there's withholdings and there's a lot of exchange of paperwork. So it helps you if you respond as quickly as you can to request. It normally averages around 2 to 3 months.
And Kathy Buckley asks, we're a state government agency that is considered a criminal justice agency and will be responsible for implementing a rape kit tracking system. Would they be considered an eligible applicant for purpose area 1, even though they're not law enforcement or a prosecutor's office?
Yes, they should be able to apply under 1.
All right. We've run through the list. I know, Angela, you wanted to circle back to the FBI quote unquote takeover of an FGG case. Did you want to touch on that now?
Yeah, we can't have Amy on the call without getting her at least one question. Amy, would you mind speaking to how the FBI IG team works with the agency on their cases?
Sure, of course. Hi, everybody. So as Angela mentioned, we are not taking over your case. We are just an assistance piece specifically for the IGG tree building or additional assistance with reference testing or surreptitious collection. We do open a parallel case in our field office, the local field office, and that gives us the authority to assist in the investigation, utilize the IGG technique, do reference testing. So the case opening is not because we are looking to take over your case, but it's because we need the authority to utilize the technique as well as go out and do interviews if necessary. The biggest thing for us is making the IGG process collaborative with our state and local partners, and we'll regularly keep you guys updated on the status of the IGG cases as they go through the tree building process.
Great, thank you, Amy, for your insight. Another question just came through from Sarah. I'm still not fully clear what the 75% of downstream case activities entails. references that there was mention of working the case, but not necessarily investigation or prosecution, and recalls hearing that review of the cases is a qualified activity. So can you guys just elaborate on that piece?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Essentially what we're trying to do for some of the more advanced purpose areas is to ensure that if your jurisdiction had a backlog of kits, that you didn't test the kits and then stop. We want to know that they were reviewed by a multidisciplinary team, that you looked at reopening those cases, that you notified any victims that might have been included in surviving the backlog, so that the kit testing was not, that's just the first step in our view. And so the natural downstream activities that we're referring to are exactly the things that you would do with cold cases. So you're going to get your evidence back, and then you're going to reopen your investigation. So not all of those are going to be appropriate for reinvestigation or prosecution based on the individual circumstances. But we want to know that each of those cases has gotten a second look from your team before you advance into those more advanced purpose areas.
Thank you, Carrie. And Andy Singer has asked about the FBI having input on technology used for FGG casework.
Funded under SAKI, the two distinct activities, if that's what the question is asking.
Yes,
the SAKI, yeah. So the SAKI sites will choose their FGG lab provider based on their own procurement guidelines that also fall within the FBI guidelines. But Amy also looks like she wants to add something as well.
Yeah, no, Angela, exactly that. We will often discuss what technologies are available based on the sample that is readily used or can be used for IGG, but it is always up to the SAKI site to make the decision on what lab to utilize. That is not an FBI decision during this process.
Okay. What is the standard of proof that they have that sites have, or applicants, excuse me, have properly taken significant steps towards reaching that 75% threshold for submitted cases?
I would think you would want a letter on letterhead from probably most of your stakeholders, right? Like you want to have your lab, your prosecutorial agency, and your law enforcement. And it can be a joint letter if necessary to just certify that you have been through 75% of your backlog cases.
Thank you, Carrie. We got a couple of more minutes left. That's all the questions that we've received at this time. But since we do have a few minutes, just wanted to open up the floor to our presenters, see if there's anything else you guys wanted to touch on while we wait on any last minute questions to trickle in.
Yeah, one of the things that we can do to help you if you've never applied for a SAKI grant, if you're finding it a little daunting, you can reach out and we can introduce you to an existing SAKI site they're always willing to talk to other agencies, other jurisdictions. And Carrie, can you refresh my memory where previously funded applications live?
They are on our website, but if anybody has trouble finding that, it's on BJA's website. I believe there is a link specifically on the SAKI landing page for BJA for that. But if you can't find it or if you have trouble finding it, just email me, send you the link so that you can see previously successfully funded applications. And as you're trying to assess the need in your community for which purpose area you might need, you need to just sit down and work with your stakeholders about, do you have a backlog? Are there partially tested kits that need to be tested? those kinds of questions are the things that you want to speak to your stakeholders about when assessing which purpose area to apply for.
All righty, thank you so much. That's all the questions that we have at this time. So thank you to our presenters today, BJA, Amy from the FBI. Excited about all the good things to come in the program and appreciate you guys sharing your insight. We are now going to move into our final poll questions. We'd love for everyone in attendance to please take a moment and fill these poll questions out. We'd really appreciate your feedback. This is used to report on our performance as part of our specific BJA funding. We'll leave these up for 60 seconds or so and await responses. All right, thank you all for your feedback on the poll questions. Let's see, had one more question come in. Okay, will the recording of the webinar or slides be available? Yes, this brings me to my closeout. The webinar was recorded. It will be available in the next few business days. An email will be sent out to those on the SAKI listserv, but also anyone who is registered as part of this event. That will include a recording of the webinar, but then also a PDF of the slide deck. But again, just wanted to reiterate our thanks to our presenters today. Thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your time and attention. If there's any additional questions about the webinar specifically, feel free to reach out to the SAKI TTA team at sakitta@rti.org. Otherwise, thank you again and have a great afternoon.